Hi, I'm Ryan Davis,
And I'm Kiernan Schmidt.
and this is Out of Office, a travel podcast.
This seat taken.
Hey, Kiernan,
Hi, Ryan.
you got power over there?
Yeah, Ryan is referring to the fact that last time, mid-recording, my power conked out during our recording session, and it conked out for like just the hour that we needed to record. It was like just the right amount to, like, nothing in my refrigerator even started to thaw. But
Right.
it was just long enough that you had to leave and we couldn't finish.
When
So,
the power goes out, I eat all the ice cream in my house just as a precautionary measure.
Ryan, you just turned the lights off. No, I think that this might be a power outage. Might be a while now.
Yeah, you can't risk it.
Of course. Were you part of the major New York power outage a couple weeks ago?
No, I live in Brooklyn, so we didn't. It used to be that Brooklyn would lose power, Manhattan would keep power, and now it's the opposite.
I actually didn't know that electricity had finally gotten into Bushwick, so I'm glad.
Yeah,
that's finally here.
we got it along with DSL, so it's
All right. Well, Ryan, I don't want to go too far
No.
off track because today we've got a stellar interview. And, if anybody just tuned in and they went, oh, what are these guys even talking about? No, stick around. We've got, because this is a primo interview. We're talking to a New York Times travel journalist. His name's Peter Kujawinski. And he wrote a two-part series. The first article went up in June. Next one's coming up in August. And it's about why people don't appreciate enough the amazing U.S. state park system. And he visited 53 U.S. state parks.
that is more than one per state. He doubled up on some states.
So it's funny you say that because he didn't even go to. I assumed that he had gone to every state because he checked
Right.
out state parks in Hawaii and Alaska. Turns out he went to 42 states, but he will absolutely be hitting 50. He said,
yeah, these poor 8 states, they don't have anything to offer. They've got no state parks.
No, he said it was because writing on Deadline, there ended up being a trip that he didn't go on to the Southwest. But don't let that
No.
scare you off because
We got 42 states covered, folks. We promise.
I have to say, I had being a national park nut myself, I don't think I had appreciated enough what you can get in a state park. He's got some great pro tips. And some of my favorites is when you should be looking up state parks, even if you're heading towards a national park. So, listen, Ryan, he and I, we just connected at a basic level. I'm going to suggest that we skip this whole beginning part where we banter.
Yeah.
I don't think we have time for a quest for Rick Steves this week. There's nothing to recalculate. We're not looking back for a tagline.
No.
It's time to take off and talk to New York Times writer Peter Kujawinski.
Cabin crew?
Flight attendants, prepare for takeoff, please.
Today I'm speaking with Peter Kujawinski, a writer who recently published the first of 2 New York Times articles about his year-long exploration of 53 national parks from Maine to Hawaii. But that's just a small percentage of the total number of state parks, which, as I learned in the article, clocks in at a shocking 8,565 across the United States. So, Peter, thanks for coming on Out of Office.
Yeah, thanks for having me. It's a pleasure.
So let's start with what inspired your interest in state parks, and how did you choose to map out this journey?
I think it started simply because when I was going on a road trip for a previous New York Times piece, I was doing this road trip with my family down the Mississippi River. I kept on seeing these brown signs on the highway, and the brown signs always say, something, something state park. And the more that I focused on that, the more that I realized it's not as if they were every single exit, but I'd say like every 50 miles or so, you'd see something like that. And then I did a little bit more research on it, and I realized just the staggering number of state parks out there. And I was just drawn to how many of them have such interesting stories. So it kind of just started organically. I have 3 small kids, and when you're on a road trip and after a while they need a place to just run around, and we'd stop at 1 or 2 of these. And I was always interested and amazed at what I saw, and it just kind of started from there.
And you described basically as you got deeper into studying state parks. I really like this sentence that you wrote in your first article in the Times. The singularity of state parks is their meld of nature, history, local culture, and ordinary life. And that strikes me as quite different from when I think of national parks. So maybe you can speak a bit about what separates in your mind what one can find in state parks versus those kind of landmark national parks.
Well, I think for me, state parks are all about the unknown and the surprise. There are just a few state parks that are really iconic. And of course, the first one that comes to mind is Niagara Falls. Um, but all of the others, or not all of the others, but most of the others, they are super popular for the people who live in that area. And it's there that you get your first overnight camping experience, your first experience, perhaps getting lost on a trail or something like that. Whereas national parks, in my mind, are really the most impressive specimens of kind of nature or of adventure that we have in the United States. And so you kind of know what you're going to get. You know, when you go to a national park, you'll probably be pretty blown away or really find it beautiful for all sorts of different reasons. And state parks, you could go from something that is actually not that impressive, perhaps even just as impressive as like a city park, or as I found when I was in Alaska and places like that, you could find a state park that really rivals a national park in how beautiful and how and how impressive it is.
And for your journey to 53 different state parks in 1 year, how did it start? Was it a continuous road trip, or was it kind of where you could fit one in? Did the family always come? Did you sometimes leave them behind? What were the logistics of that?
When I proposed it, I told them, hey, you know what? I want to do five big articles about all of the different state parks. And amazingly enough, they said yes. So I was like, whoa, wait a second. I got a lot of work ahead of me. So I started doing this. And then about halfway through, they're like, you know what? Actually, we can only do two. So I winnowed it down to basically state parks east of the Mississippi and state parks west of the Mississippi. And that's what the first one is east of the Mississippi. And the next one coming out is going to be all the state parks west. But really, in terms of how I did it, it really was fitting it in around vacations with my family, a couple of really fun week-long road trips. Like the first one, I'm based in Chicago. So the first one was going through the Midwest. The second one, I was actually that summer. I did a 5-week road trip where we started in Chicago, went all the way down to the south, went across the south, and then up the eastern seaboard, and then back again. So a huge circle around basically the east of the Mississippi region. So I would say that was with my family. And then west of the Mississippi, I really got into just kind of traveling by myself, and I had a couple of these couple day long trips, some into Texas state parks, California, and then the photographer who shoots the photos for the Western State Park. He and I did this awesome trip. Starting in Alaska, where he's based from, then jumping back down and kind of doing Montana, and so it was all this to say it was very it was just something that I managed to fit in when I had an extra week or two.
I'm interested. Why would they cut it down from a 5 article series to a two article series? Because based on the first article, I'd say there are so many unwritten stories that you've uncovered here. Histories that come through in the park, local histories, and even just kind of spotlights on communities.
Yeah, I think it was simply a matter of space. The New York Times travel section has to cover the entire world, and there's a lot of great stories all around the world. And I think that it was ultimately just a matter of space. Nothing much more complicated than that. But you're absolutely right. I mean, when I started this, I quickly realized that not only does each state have a different dynamic when it comes to their state parks, each region is rich in its own way. I mean, I really was into doing a state article just about the Midwest, just about the South, just about the East, Southeast, and Northwest, and kind of weaving all of those together into this narrative of kind of the different regions and how they approached the idea not just of exploration and of nature, but how did they approach recreation? And like, for example, I was astonished at how well put together the Missouri state parks are. And you tease that back and you realize, well, part of it is because they have a dedicated revenue stream that's part of the income tax, or the part of the sales tax of Missouri. Whereas the just a few states over, the Alabama state parks really were, I should say, scrappy. It's like they were trying to find a way to get their stuff to get to keep going any way that they could. And so just that mix was really fascinating. I mean, it's kind of like how in the United States, we bemoan this lack of, or this nationalization of our restaurants, or everything's the same. But when you go to state parks, they can be very, very different, from really down on their luck to just kind of almost prosperous. And that's what I found so fascinating, is because not only do you see the nature and the beauty of these specific regions, not only do you see the culture of these specific regions, the fascinating origin stories of these state parks, you really get a glimpse of the way that the societies in these areas function right now. And it's all by visiting these different state parks.
Well, one of the beauties of podcasting is we have all the time in the world. Are there any other regional differences that you noticed in your travels?
I found it fascinating to see the difference between the southern state parks and the northeastern ones. And I think part of it is because I visited one right after the other. So in the south, the ones that I visited, now there are some that are very heavily used, but many that I saw were kind of forgotten. They had been built during this real boom of state park construction that happened during the Great Depression, because the Civilian Conservation Corps just built so many of these all across the country. But you could tell with a lot of these that they really had a lot of faded glory. I mean, they were just absolutely beautiful, and you could tell all the crazy stories that had gone on there. But you could also tell that there weren't that much used now. Whereas then fast forward to the Northeast, and they were just absolutely jam-packed. I was most astonished when I went to Walden Pond outside of Boston, and I was expecting some sort of relaxed communing with nature, and it was just the exact opposite. It was like the epicenter of all of Boston. All of these people were like swimming on lane lines, running through forests. It's like it was very far from communing with nature. So you could really see how in some places state parks are the epicenter of their community. Other times they're an afterthought. But that's what I loved about it, is that no matter which one you went to, you're always slightly surprised by something that you saw.
Yeah, I'm Boston based, and so Walden Park is just up the street. And oh yeah, I mean, you have to get there before 10 a.m. if you want a parking space, and it doesn't have that transcendentalist vibe that you might
totally
be going
not.
for. But then again, I feel like the last year has really revealed Thoreau. He used to walk to his parents' house. He wasn't as much of a hermit as everyone thought.
Oh, you are totally right. You're totally right. Absolutely. And I think that the theme for Northeast state parks is, if there is water in the summertime, it will be jam-packed.
Yeah.
Because all of the state parks that I saw that had beaches or even a tiny little pond, they were jam-packed. Whereas I went to one, which was Robert Frost's farm in New Hampshire, which was beautiful. It was this incredibly well-preserved farm where he basically said in a letter a few years later that farm was the origin of all of his poetry. And you go there and you go on this beautiful walk through the forest. And I think we were one of two people there, and that was it. So, but of course, there was no water there, so that's why it wasn't busy.
Right. Well, I have to imagine, given that it's frost, I would think the fences would be pretty high to get through anyway.
Yes, exactly.
So I have visited a few state parks, mostly en route to national parks.
Hmm.
And I've often been struck by how, often this land is adjacent or just a little bit a ways and preserves natural structures that are just as extraordinary as what you're going to get inside the park. And I particularly remember when my wife Catherine and I were visiting the Everglades. We were sort of kayaking around the Everglades, and we were going in and out of reservation land and state parks and all these different, kind of boundaries that doesn't actually affect the nature. And I'm a bit of a box checker. Like I want to, hit all the national parks and get
Sure.
that big check mark. And I remember I was really pressing the guide of like, but are we in the national park? And he kept being like, dude, you know, sit back in your kayak and enjoy what you're seeing here. It
Yes.
does like these boundaries are, made by sort of need for funding or by legislation, but that they should not affect your actual experience of what you're seeing there. Because really, I mean, to think that Niagara Falls is a state park, I think actually probably surprises a lot of folks.
Yeah, absolutely. It surprised me too. And pro tip that I discovered over this last year, that if you go to the state park that is right nearby the national park, it'll be a lot less busy, and you'll get a sense of the environment, I think, much more than you will at the national parks. Like, for example, I went to Harriman State Park in Idaho, and I talk about this a bit in the upcoming piece, which is right by Yellowstone. And you get this exact same topography, you get the exact same beauty. Um, and you also don't have to elbow anybody to take pictures or anything like that, especially during the really busy times. I mean, I was there during the summer, or during kind of the late summer, and then I basically had this state park, which is on the par of the national park, to myself,
Mm.
and it was just beautiful. And of course, I had this really crazy history of like how it came to be. And you often do find that state parks and other national areas are clustered next to national parks, and take advantage of all of that, because that will because it's from bird's eye view, it's all the same.
Yeah, it goes back to that Everglades guide.
Yeah,
Just
exactly.
calm down, all right? Yeah, it's all the 2 that, I remember specifically, that, come to a similar pro tip was when I was traveling through South Dakota, sort of in the Black Hills and going to Wind Cave National Park in the Badlands, there's Custer State Park, and, that was the very closest that I ever got to bison. I mean, literally
Yes.
just surrounding the car,
Yeah.
to the point where
Yeah.
you could not drive, and you got to observe, the beautiful wildlife. So the wildlife is just as prevalent in the state parks because guess what? Animals really don't care about those
Yes,
boundaries.
absolutely. And in fact, it's funny you should say Custer State Park. I did not go there, and I have heard from so many different people about how beautiful it is. So that's definitely still on my bucket list. But given that there are over 8,000 and I only visited 53, I have many more to go.
Yeah, for a box checker like me, I mean, that's going to be a really hard list to get through.
Yes,
Um,
exactly.
and I remember too in Utah, traveling between Zion and Bryce national parks. There's a wonderful park called Kodachrome Basin State Park,
Mm,
and it has all of that desert sandstone spires, and it's called Kodachrome after the color film, and because the colors that you see in nature there are so extraordinary and so bright and vibrant, that there really was no other name that they could possibly give this. Exactly to your point, where Zion is overwhelmed with people, you could wait an hour and a half just to get on the one bus that's allowed
yeah.
to take you further into the park. Kodachrome was virtually empty.
Wow.
And my friend and I could go on hikes through it and really feel like we were getting some of that sort of restful solitude.
Yeah, no, absolutely, and that's something that I've noticed throughout my visits. I mean, the last park that I visited, and I talk about this in the piece, upcoming one, is I actually went to Yosemite National Park, And the reason I went to, and it's the only national park that I went to during my year of state parks. And the reason that I did it is because Yosemite is actually originally a state park. And in fact, the entire national park system is based on um, um, something that happened back during the Civil War when Abraham Lincoln decided to sign something which deeded Yosemite to the state of California. And so, it was amazing to kind of go to Yosemite, and this was very much during off season. So I did get a glimpse of kind of that emptiness that I think you can get in some state parks, and just witness how the state park system and the national park system are inextricably linked, and it's pretty cool to tease out all of that history. And in fact, I just one quick thing that I saw on the National Park System website is that they said that the first official state park was Yellowstone, and there's some speculation that originally the the legislators that decided to put this to make this a national park wanted to make it a state park, because that was the idea, is that you, just like Yosemite, you deed it to the states. However, because of problems between the states, which Yellowstone straddles, they couldn't figure those out. They were fussing with each other, and then they decided, all right, forget it. We'll just nationalize it. And
Yeah, because things are always easier at the national
yeah,
level, right?
exactly.
So when you talk about how the history of the national park system, state's park system is intertwined, give us a sense of how that has come to be. What is the founding of the state park system? Did they really branch off separately? Do states oversee and decide what gets to be a state park?
So yeah, that's a great question. I mean, basically, it started during the Civil War when Abraham Lincoln deeded um, deeded this to California, and it really was this important moment because for the first time ever, a government said, you know what, we are going to give something to another government, just for it to be used by the public. And it's how this system of parks started. Um, but really, the national park idea, I think, caught on in I would say over the next 10 to 20 to 30 years in the last decades of the 19th century, simply because there were some parks, some areas that were so beautiful and so iconic that people said, you know what, we're going to actually put together this system of national parks. But then, of course, like once you've got this system of national parks, you've got to figure out a way to run it. And then you started with the National Park Service. And so with the National Park Service, then all of these different states realized how wonderful these national parks were, and more importantly, how popular they were becoming. And they're like, okay, well, we want to have a national park in our state. And then you started getting all of these different states trying to basically get their local favorite to become a national park. And so the founder of the national park system, this guy named Stephen Mather, said, you know what, this isn't really tenable to have a national park system that's going to have thousands and thousands of national parks all across the United States. And so what we need is a system of national parks that are reserved for just the parks that are iconic at kind of an international level. And then we need to have a separate system where we introduce Americans across the United States to the idea of outdoor recreating and to sleep among the stars and that kind of thing. And that's how the state park system started. And so even though the very first park, so to speak, was a state park, the actual system of state parks didn't really get started until the early 20th century, when there was a national conference on state parks. It started in 1921. And ever since then, you've had both the state park system and the national park system being built together.
And the first director of the national park, Stephen Mather, called for a state park every 100 miles.
That's right.
And is that? I mean, that's really come to fruition, right? I mean, most people grow up within driving distance of a great state park.
Absolutely. And in fact, I mean, I think he was probably being very hopeful that it would be a state park every 100 miles. But I would say now you could probably find a state park every 20 miles or every 50 miles. I mean, they are remarkably popular. And in fact, in terms of overall visits, and of course, this is helped by the fact that there's so many state parks. But in terms of overall visits, state parks are visited more than national parks.
Hmm. And so you reference in your first article, this idea that everybody kind of grows up with a state park in their backyard, and I think everybody has a connection to that state park. For me, it was a state park. It's a state park in Connecticut called Sleeping Giant. That's where my Boy Scout troop went and hiked. And your article inspired me to look up the history of where that name came from, Sleeping Giant. And I think a lot of these names, like Kodachrome, like Custer,
Mhm.
they have these stories behind them that connect you back to the history. So basically, it's a set of hills that look like a sleeping giant. You can see a very clear head, nose, chin, stomach, knees, feet. And the Native Americans of the Quinnipiac tribe, which people will have heard of Quinnipiac from Quinnipiac River, Quinnipiac University, the polling institution, they believed that this was a giant stone spirit called Hobomok,
Mm.
and that he had become angered at people and stamped his foot so hard that the Connecticut River had to divert to this area where it actually takes a pretty severe bend, and then laid down and continued to survive in stone for all these years later. And in fact, Quinnipiac University is directly across the street. So,
Wow.
this history is buried in the names. And I would highly encourage anyone who's never really thought about the state park, those brown signs you see on your highway. A quick Google will actually reveal lots of great and new, exciting information.
That's amazing. The state park that was closest to where I grew up is called Starved Rock State Park. It's probably the largest state park near Chicago, so it gets very busy. But Starved Rock, the reason that it's called that is because because of it was the last holding out place of a Native American tribe who was fleeing another Native American tribe, and they starved there. And it's the history is kind of crazy.
There's a theme that's striking me, which is Native American history being found in
Hmm.
these state parks.
Yeah,
That was a story I had, then a story you had, and in your article, your first article, you talk about Prophetstown State Park.
yeah.
What's the history there?
So Prophetstown State Park is one of these places that I passed by because anytime you want to go from Chicago to kind of the East Coast, you're going to go through Indiana for a while, and one of the main interstates goes right past Prophetstown State Park, and I always remember seeing this. I'm like, I wonder what that is, and then I actually stopped. Um, and Prophetstown is the name of a town that was put together by a Native American confederation. They were being pushed out of Ohio, and they decided to make their capital and their last stand, so to speak, in this place called Prophetstown. And it, it was a town just for I think a year or two or something like that. Because what happened was then in 1811, the governor of Ohio, who later became president, William Henry Harrison, he led an army against this Native American Confederacy, and they met at the Battle of Tippecanoe, which, as I found out, was literally right next to Prophetstown State Park.
Hmm.
They won. Harrison's forces won, and then afterwards, he led his men to Prophetstown. It had just been abandoned, and then the people fled, and they burned it to the ground. Now, this is an incredibly sad story. No matter what you think of the settling of the United States and what happened, I mean, I think to me, at least, I grew up with this history of the United States of just kind of, manifest destiny expanding out and taking over virgin territory. And I think that my travels to state parks made me realize that our land has been settled for a very long time. Now, Prophetstown State Park is a very sweet state park in a sense. I mean, it's got a water park, it's got some trails, and they actually do mention the fact of all of this, but it's done in such a way that um, it really is transformed. Like all of the rough edges are sanded out or sanded off, and it's just, well, there was this battle, and now here, look, here's our Native American village, and they've reconstructed the way that Native Americans would have lived during that time. But it just felt so weird. I mean, it was, here I was, and my kids were running around, and we were on the ground that had been burned centuries ago, and that was key to the further white settlement of the Midwest. And of course, now we think of Ohio and Illinois as just these kind of, classic Midwestern places. But I mean, we totally forget that they were the epicenter of the struggle between Native Americans trying to keep their land and settlers from the East Coast trying to expand their dominion into what is now the United States. And all of this happened because I actually stopped at the state park instead of just passing by it.
Yeah. You've suddenly made me not unhappy that William Henry Harrison only lasted 30 days.
Well, there you go. Exactly.
And another piece of the history that seems thematic through state parks is the work of the Civilian Conservation Corps and Works Progress Administration. I'm a big Theodore Roosevelt nut, though we talk about presidents and presidential historic sites in history on the podcast a lot.
Yeah.
And that actually, going back to Sleeping Giant, my childhood state park, there's a massive tower there that, in my head when I was a kid was basically a castle. And sure enough, it was built by the Works Progress Administration when folks just needed to be put to work.
That's right. That's right.
And especially in New England, I find that those stone structures, popped up throughout the 30s and still last solidly to today, which is, basically gives you something to hike to.
Yeah, absolutely. And in fact, I mean, some of the state parks that I went to that had not been updated very much, they are still these Civilian Conservation Corps structures are still in incredibly good shape and still form the basis of picnics and shelters all across the state park. And it's basically, I mean, they have stood the test of time. But no, I found them not in every single state park because, of course, there's been some new ones since then. But I would say in some of the most beautiful state parks, like the very first ones that each state said, you know what, we really want to preserve this area. You very often found Civilian Conservation Corps structures there, and actually, I mean, there were some of my favorites have these massive lodges that were built by the Civilian Conservation Corps and now house restaurants and rooms and things like that. So I loved to just see the presence of all of these because, of course, they kind of, in some ways, they look similar, but you can tell that they were very much made according to general principles and not cookie cutter because every single one is slightly different.
And where particularly are you thinking of great lodges?
Oh, so there is this one in southern Illinois, and I should say that for Illinois, I grew up here, and I'm very used to doing the drive from Chicago to St. Louis, and so I basically thought all of Illinois was just a whole bunch of cornfields.
Yeah.
And then I went to I went further south to the southern I'd say the southern third of Illinois, and all of a sudden it transforms to this just absolutely beautiful rolling hills and riverland area. And one of my favorite places that I wasn't able to talk about was called Giant City State Park in right by Carbondale. In Giant City State Park, the reason it's called Giant City is because there are these massive boulders, I would say 40 feet, 50 feet tall, and they're sheer because, and it's all, of course, just, water and thousands of years forms it, just like it formed the Grand Canyon. But it really does look like a city for giants. It looks like it was carved by European artisans. It's like the kind of thing that you would find in some small little town in Portugal or France or something like that. But it's actually a state, but it's actually totally natural.
Hmm.
And so you walk around there, and it's just really beautiful. But the centerpiece of this really large state park is a lodge that was built by the Civilian Conservation Corps. It now has this really great restaurant, and it just is super cozy. I mean, you kind of go there and you get massive fireplace, and everything is on, looks like it was taken out of some sort of movie based in the 1920s. And it's really very well preserved. And I just loved spending some time there. So, I mean, that's an example of how you've got these lodges that are just the centerpiece. And of course, the state parks themselves are very impressive. But a place like Giant City, I loved it so much that I actually went back a couple months ago with my family just because I wanted to spend more time there.
So for those who have become interested in state parks, where would you recommend starting?
The best resource was actually a travel guide that came out from National Geographic, and they do have a book on state parks. And I was very lucky that when I started my year-long excursion, they had just come out with a new edition. The interesting thing about that guide is that it's not curated by and National Geographic staff. Basically, what happens, at least as this is what it seemed to me, is that each state park was asked to contribute verbiage and language on their top state parks, and then the National Geographic just basically put all of that together. Now, I found that I didn't necessarily agree that some of the ones in there were really the very best that state had to offer. But when you have so many state parks, it's a really good jumping off point. And it's a really, so that's how I started with some of the more iconic ones. But then afterwards, I mean, I found that because of the nature of what state parks are, some of my best experiences were the ones that I didn't necessarily plan on going to. Like, for example, I was traveling from Missouri across into Georgia, and my family stopped by just for a couple hours at this one state park in Mississippi called Waldoxie, and I had literally just found it. I was my wife was driving, and I just Googled state parks nearby, and I was like, oh, there's one coming up. Let's just stop. And we were really exhausted from being in the car. And Waldoxie is this just like Southern Gothic state park. It had these massive Civilian Conservation Corps structures for groups of several hundred. It had this faded paddleboard dock that was basically going into the lake, and it was totally empty. And you could see how popular it had been back in the 60s and 70s, and at this point there was just nobody there. And it's one of these mysterious places that still resonates with me. And this happened just because we were in the area.
Yeah, and I would also recommend for those who do find themselves kind of stumbling into state parks or quickly Googling when they see a brown sign whether to pull in, to speak to a ranger or the person who's letting you into the parking lot to ask what there is to see. Because I know I was recently at Smith Rock State Park near Bend, Oregon, and Catherine and I were going. We just had an hour for a short hike. And only because we asked the person behind the information desk did we know to look for a bald eagle's nest that was right around the corner. And she said, there's 2 fledglings in the nest, so you might see some wings popping up, but the children are too afraid to, take the leap yet. However, somebody's going to get lucky and see these eagles take their first flight from that nest. And so we stood for a while. We didn't see the first flight, but we did see some wings and heads popping up.
Wow.
And similarly, there were these stones. There was a stone structure she called out to look for called Monkey's Face Rock or Monkey Face Rock. And sure enough, it was a rock that looked exactly like a monkey face that I can't say I necessarily would have seen without having it pointed out to me. But yet it's one of my favorite photos from the trip. So
Yeah.
take advantage of having conversations with people who know and love the park.
Yeah, you are absolutely right, and I'm glad you said that because I would do that immediately every single time that I went to a state park. Sometimes there wasn't anybody around, but I would say most of the time there was. And just by asking them, "Hey, I've got 2 or 3 hours. What should I do?" They normally knew exactly where to go and what was in season and what was the best hike to take. And I mean, Giant City State Park. I really had no idea why it was called that. And then I said, so I said, "Hey, what should I see?" And they're like, "Well, you should probably look at these enormous pillars that look like a city." I'm like, "Whoa, really?"
Yeah. So I guess start with the name and then go from there.
Exactly.
And in the show notes for today's episode, we'll certainly link to the first article. If the second article has been published yet, we'll also put that in there. If not, we'll follow up on a future episode with that.
Perfect.
So thanks, Peter Kujawinski, for speaking to me, and we'll be keeping an eye out for that follow-up article.
Thanks. It was a pleasure chatting. I appreciate it.
Now it's time for the last stop.
Ladies and gentlemen, this is the last stop on this train. Everyone, please leave the train.
No, Ryan, we are here in the last stop. We're out of the interview. We're into the last segment. This is your favorite segment. It's my favorite segment. It's popularly known as the People segment. It's a time for us to pause and reflect, and it's where you and I each talk about one thing that week that fed our wanderlust, that inspired that spirit of travel. Might be something we ate, might be something we read, might be something we bought, something we experienced, maybe a local tourism spot. So, Ryan, what was it that fed your spirit of wanderlust this week? What is your last stop?
Well, I think it was great that you and Peter talked about how everyone has the state park that they grew up with.
You got to have a local place.
You got to have your local place. So I was just back home in the great state of Maryland. It reminded me of my home park, which is Assateague State Park, which is it's sort of a beach park. So it's a national park that is on the eastern shore of Maryland, and it is populated by wild ponies.
Huh.
Yeah, that's sort of its claim to fame. Like,
is that dangerous? I feel like I'd be terrified of a wild pony.
No, I mean they're pretty chill. They're pretty chill ponies.
Yeah.
And they. So when you go to the beach, it's a beach like a state park. You pay like $5. You go and you park and you can hang out all day on the beach. And then you get to see these kind of ponies. It's like Fire Island has bears and Assateague has ponies.
I mean, you're both voicing a reason that we should be considering Fire Island for state parkhood. But also you're making me wonder. I mean, are you allowed to approach these wild ponies? Can you try to ride them? Do you get to wrangle them?
You're definitely not supposed to approach,
Okay.
or like, I mean, like in any national. You ever been to a park here? You're not supposed to approach the animals. It's like no different. They're not. They're not for play. They're serious feral.
Sure.
They're feral ponies that have been there through some weird quirk of history. But one of the cool things though is every year these ponies are actually rounded up because there are too many of them, and so
so you can wrangle them.
Well, I mean, cowboys too.
Okay.
Folks like you and I are not.
Yeah, no, we're not wrangling. No.
Yeah, we are not wrangling the ponies.
Yeah.
But they basically they wrangle these ponies,
Sure.
and they swim them across the Assateague Channel to Chincoteague Island.
Oh my God.
Yeah, so a bunch of ponies swim across this little channel.
Can horses swim?
Yeah, horses love to swim. Have you ever seen like Lonesome Dove? Horses swim fine.
Hold on. Based on everything I know about horses, which comes primarily from the Oregon Trail, whenever I tried to ford that river, when the raft broke apart, the ponies would die, the wagon would sink, all my children would get dysentery, and the game was over.
Well, no, these ponies are natural born swimmers.
Do they have webbed hooves?
They live for it. They live for it. So these cowboys, or wannabe cowboys, because
Sure.
Eastern Shore, they drive them through the Assateague Channel, and then they parade them down the streets of Chincoteague. This is real. And look, you haven't heard the best part. The first horse that gets ashore is named King or Queen Neptune. and is given away during a raffle.
Oh, wow. And then shortly later is turned into a very special bottle of glue. Wait,
No.
Oh, but where are they driving them to? What are they doing with them after they've taken them out of the park?
They're sold to farms. They become farm animals.
So they break them and they become domesticated.
They domesticate them.
Oh, wow. That is fascinating. And you've been to this.
Yes, this was something that we did growing up as a kid. My parents would be like, "All right, we're gonna go watch the ponies swim," and I'm like, "All right, it seems like something to do." You know, when you live on the Eastern Shore of Maryland, it's you don't got a whole lot to choose from.
I love King and Queen Neptune. That's that's fantastic.
Yeah, so that is the magic that only a state park can provide. Assateague State Park, and that's the Chincoteague Pony Swim. And there's some great videos on YouTube we will definitely post.
Oh, excellent. Yeah, absolutely.
So, Kiernan, what is your last stop this week?
Well, I already spoke about my local state park, Sleeping Giant, during the interview, so I can't use that one. But there was an obituary that caught my eye this week that absolutely fed my spirit of wanderlust. It was the death of architect Caesar Pelli.
Sorry, that's just
weird. Do you think it was wanderlust for exploring another world?
No, that's just a weird thing to say. You were like, I felt like I should maybe cross the river to Hades and see.
Yeah, the river Styx. I'm going to put those coins in my eyes.
Yeah, when I'm reading the obituary, usually I'm thinking about like places I don't want to go.
No. This was the death of an architect.
Right.
He had reached a noble old age, and his name is Caesar Pelli. Have you ever heard of him?
I don't think that I have.
So he used to be dean of the Yale School of Architecture, and he's built many famous buildings all around the world. Just to tick off a few, Ronald Reagan National Airport in D.C.
DCA?
I knew you were going to say that. Pacific Design Center in L.A., the U.S. Embassy in Tokyo, the Salesforce Tower in San Francisco. Probably the building that he's most famous for, and the one that caught my eye and that is featured prominently at the top of his obituary, was what's called the Petronas Towers in Kuala Lumpur, Malaysia. And I actually visited Kuala Lumpur back in 2017, so not too long ago. And at the time that these towers were built, that Pelli built them, they were actually the tallest buildings in the world. From 1998 to 2004, the Petronas Towers, tallest buildings in the world. And we'll post them to the Instagram. You can click on the
These
link.
are super famous. People have seen these.
Yeah, they're beautiful. They're two towers that are adjacent to each other. They're affectionately called the twin corn cobs because they kind of have this like geometric textured look to them.
And that's affectionate.
Well, yeah, they like calling them the corn cobs. You know, it's like the gherkin in London. People, you get used to them. You have some fun with it.
Sure.
And
you can walk across them.
That's right. There is a sky bridge that connects the two towers. And you can go up and tour that and learn all about the history of building it. And it won praise all around the world for the fact that it looks very inspired by the geometric forms that are in Arabic art. And this is because of Malaysia's Islamic heritage. And so they're a very cool melding of kind of the old and the new. They're picking up on the culture, but they're very futuristic. To me, they're one of the most kind of sci-fi looking buildings that I've ever seen. And they are absolutely iconic in my mind.
They look fantastic at night.
Yeah, absolutely gorgeous. And I might even... I remember I took a very good video of myself with my little Theodore Roosevelt cutout with those in the background. So maybe I'll dig up that video and post it to the Insta, which of course is at OOO Podcast on Instagram.
Yeah, and you can always just slide into our DMs there with questions or comments. You can shoot us an email at outofofficepod@gmail.com.
Yeah,
we are so findable.
Different than OOO Podcast.
We'll be working branding. We like to keep it fresh.
Yeah, no, you want people to have to remember many different names. But anyway, I think the Petronas Tower is very cool. It made me kind of regret that we never had Caesar Pelli on the show before he passed away. But his son continues on the architecture firm, and so we should keep an eye out for what projects they're working on.
Well, if you get that trip across the River Styx, you can maybe grab an interview with Caesar.
Oh, it's dark, but you know what? I will absolutely put him on the list. Yeah. But anyway, it really brought me back, and well worth a read of the interesting life of this architect.
Well, Kiernan, what are we talking about next week?
Oh, Ryan, I cannot wait for next week's interview.
Yeah. We have an amazing August, by the way.
Yeah, we're gonna
drop bomb after. It's like going to be Old Town Road every week.
It's kind of like
viral sensation.
You know how on TV shows they have those weeks,
Sweeps Week,
exactly, and they just pull out all the
We're
stuff.
gonna have Tom Selleck on.
Yeah, that for us, exactly. We're gonna have and absolutely knock it out of the park, August. We're gonna be launching our website in August.
We're that confident we're talking about it.
Yeah,
you know?
we're actually. That's because I know that if I don't say it, then our developers will continue to put them off. Folks, this was supposed to be done in April. No, but actually, thank you very much to Bushwick Digital for your hard work on it. And so, Ryan, next week we've got a great episode, the first of our sweeps month. And you know how sometimes we do these country spotlights?
Yes.
So we've done Iceland.
Right. Iceland is in Iceland. I believe that episode.
Iceland is in Iceland.
Yeah.
We've done Bhutan. And this time we are going to talk about when I went to Peru. So we're gonna go to the capital, Lima. We're gonna talk about the Sacred Valley. We're gonna go up to Cusco, and we're gonna end at Machu Picchu, one of the great wonders of today's world.
That sounds fantastic. It sounds like a hell of a trip.
Yeah, it's too bad. I can't say Peru is in Iceland, so I'm gonna have to. Peru has a great view, maybe.
Yeah,
because Machu Picchu, beautiful views.
Famously, yeah.
Well, I'll keep you guessing. So you're gonna have to tune in next week. You're gonna have to download to see what clever. It's probably just gonna be Peru has a view.
Yeah, no, I can't. We're not gonna come up with something.
Yeah, I gave it away.
Yeah. Well, until then, I'm Ryan Davis,
and I'm Kiernan Schmidt,
and this is Out of Office, a travel podcast.
This seat taken. Ryan, what do aquatic cowboys wear? I mean, when they go into the water, do they have like floaties and things? Do they wear swimsuits?
No, I mean, they're all like kind of old cowboys and they've got their hats on and maybe they're wearing like little floaties.
I like the idea of chaps made out of like swimsuit material.
Yeah, that would be very sexy.